My name is Mike Anderson, and until 6 months ago, I was living what I considered the American dream in Overland Park, Kansas. A comfortable home, a stable job as a senior programmer at a local tech firm, and what I thought was a happy marriage. To Jennifer, my wife of 5 years, Jennifer and I met during college at the University of Kansas. She was this vibrant marketing major with ambitious dreams and a smile that could light up any room. Her long auburn hair, emerald green eyes, and contagious laugh made her stand out from everyone else. I still remember the day I proposed to her at our favorite local coffee shop, where we spent countless hours during our college years. Life in Kansas was simple but fulfilling. We had our routines, our favorite restaurants, and a close circle of friends. I worked my programming job, and Jennifer had built a respectable career in digital marketing. But looking back now, I should have noticed the signs. Jennifer had been growing increasingly restless over the past year. She would scroll through Instagram for hours, looking at influencers and tech entrepreneurs living their best lives in Silicon Valley. "Mike, don't you feel like we're stuck in a loop?" she asked. One evening, while we were having dinner. "Everyone here is so traditional. Don't you want more excitement in our lives?" I dismissed her concerns, thinking it was just a phase. After all, we had a good life, didn't we? Then came the email that would change everything. Jennifer had been headhunted by a promising startup in San Francisco. The position was senior marketing director, with stock options and a salary that made both our eyes widen. But it wasn't just about the money. The excitement in her eyes when she talked about the innovative culture and progressive mindset of Silicon Valley was something I hadn't seen in years. "This could be our chance to grow, to experience something different," she said, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "We've been in Kansas our whole lives. Don't you want to see what else is out there?" I had my reservations. The cost of living in San Francisco was astronomical compared to Kansas. The culture would be completely different. But Jennifer had supported my career moves in the past, and I felt it was my turn to support hers. Plus, with my programming experience, finding a job in Silicon Valley wouldn't be difficult. We spent weeks researching neighborhoods, calculating budgets, and planning the move. Jennifer was like a different person during this time, energized, passionate, and full of plans. She started following tech influencers, reading books about startup culture, and even began a morning meditation routine she'd read about on some CEO's blog. The day we told our families about the move, the reactions were mixed. Jennifer's parents, always the progressive ones, were thrilled. My parents, however, couldn't understand why we'd want to leave our stable life in Kansas. "The West Coast changes people," my father warned during our farewell dinner. If only I had paid more attention to those words that we sold our house, packed our belongings, and said goodbye to the life we'd built in Kansas. Jennifer couldn't contain her excitement during the flight to San Francisco. She kept talking about the opportunities, the networking events, and how this move would open our minds to new possibilities. Looking back now, I realized that this wasn't just a geographical move. It was the beginning of a transformation that would test our marriage in ways I never imagined. The Jennifer who left Kansas with me that day was still my wife, still the woman I loved. But Silicon Valley had different plans for us, and at the center of those plans was a 29-year-old startup CEO named Dylan Matthews, though I didn't know it yet as our plane descended into San Francisco International Airport, the fog-shrouded city spreading out below us. I had no idea that I was flying straight into the storm that would destroy my marriage. But that's the thing about life-changing moments. They often come disguised as new opportunities. Our first month in San Francisco was a whirlwind of adjustments. We traded our spacious Kansas home for a modern but cramped apartment in Soma, paying triple the rent. The streets were crowded, the pace was faster, and everything seemed to operate on a different wavelength. But Jennifer? She was thriving. Her new workplace, Tech Vision Solutions, was everything she dreamed of. The office occupied 2 floors of a sleek high-rise, complete with meditation rooms, kombucha on tap, and those infamous ping-pong tables that seem mandatory in every startup. I found a position as a senior developer at a different startup, but my experience was vastly different from Jennifer's enthusiasm. Then came the day I first met Dylan Matthews, Tech Vision CEO. It was at a company mixer Jennifer insisted I attend. "You need to network more, Mike. This isn't Kansas anymore," she'd said while adjusting my collar. Dylan was exactly what you'd expect from a Silicon Valley wunderkind: tall, confident, with perfectly styled dark hair and wearing an expensive, casual outfit that probably cost more than my monthly salary in Kansas. Mike, finally meeting the man behind our marketing genius, Dylan said, shaking my hand with practiced charm. Jennifer has revolutionized our brand strategy in just weeks. The way he said my wife's name, with a hint of familiarity that made me slightly uncomfortable, should have been my first warning sign. Jennifer beamed at the praise, and I noticed she'd started dressing differently too. Gone were her casual blazers and comfortable shoes. Now she wore designer outfits that fit the tech executive image, as she explained. Her auburn hair was now styled in that sleek Silicon Valley way, and she'd started wearing contacts instead of her usual glasses. The changes weren't just superficial. Our conversations began to shift. Jennifer started peppered her speech with startup jargon: disruption, paradigm shift, synergy. She'd come home later and later, citing crucial team-building sessions that always seemed to involve artisanal cocktails and rooftop venues. "You should hear Dylan's vision for the company," became a common phrase at our dinner table. "He's really revolutionizing the industry. Dylan this, Dylan that." The young CEO had apparently become the oracle of all wisdom in Jennifer's eyes. One evening, after another late-night company event, Jennifer dropped a bombshell. "Dylan thinks you should join TechVision too. He says your coding skills are exactly what we need." I declined, explaining I was happy at my current position. The disappointment in her eyes was palpable, and for the first time, I felt like I was failing some sort of test. The startup culture began seeping into every aspect of our lives. Our weekends, once spent on quiet activities together, were now filled with networking events and startup parties. Jennifer insisted we needed to build our personal brand in the Valley. At these gatherings, I often found myself standing alone while Jennifer flitted through the crowd, always somehow ending up in animated conversation with Dylan. The changes in our relationship were subtle at first. Jennifer started attending private leadership meetings with Dylan, which always ran late. She'd come home energized, talking about new ideas and perspectives, barely noticing my growing discomfort. Our intimate moments became rare, replaced by discussions about company strategy and Silicon Valley politics that I tried to adapt to understand this new world we'd entered. I attended the meditation sessions Jennifer recommended, tried the green juice cleanses, even downloaded the productivity apps everyone swore by. But something felt off. The more Jennifer immersed herself in this culture, the more I felt like an outsider in my own marriage. One night, as Jennifer prepared for another company event, I noticed her checking her appearance more meticulously than usual. "Dylan's introducing me to some major investors tonight," she explained, applying her lipstick carefully. "First impressions are everything in this world, Mike. You should understand that by now." As I watched her leave that evening, wearing a dress that cost more than our monthly food budget in Kansas, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching my wife slip away into a world where I didn't belong. The Kansas couple who arrived in San Francisco just months ago was transforming, and not necessarily together. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a transformation that would tear our marriage apart. The Silicon Valley dreamweed chased was about to become a nightmare, with Dylan Matthews playing a much larger role than I could have ever anticipated. As spring turned to summer in San Francisco, the changes in Jennifer became impossible to ignore. Our once shared life had transformed into parallel existences that occasionally intersected at our apartment. The woman who used to send me funny memes throughout the day now took hours to respond to my texts, always with the same excuse: "Sorry, intense strategy session with Dylan." The startup culture had completely consumed her. Jennifer started attending what she called consciousness expanding workshops, weekend retreats that Dylan personally recommended. "It's about breaking free from traditional mindsets," she explained, packing her bag for another weekend away. "Dylan says we need to challenge our conventional thinking to truly innovate." I noticed other changes too. Her phone was now always face down, and she'd changed her password. When I mentioned this casually over dinner one night, she launched into a lecture about toxic possessiveness and how modern relationships require trust and space. These weren't her words. They sounded exactly like something Dylan would say. The physical changes continued as well. Jennifer started working out with a personal trainer Dylan had recommended, switched to a fully vegan diet, and even changed her perfume to something more sophisticated. Her wardrobe now consisted entirely of minimalist designer pieces and muted tones, a far cry from the colorful dresses she used to love in Kansas. TechVision's office culture seemed designed to blur the lines between professional and personal life. There were mandatory team-building exercises that always ran late into the evening, weekend hackathons that required overnight stays, and frequent inspiration trips to exotic locations. Dylan was always there, always at the center of everything. Point one. Evening, I decided to surprise Jennifer at one of these late-night sessions, bringing her favorite takeout. When I arrived at the office around 9 p.m., I found most of the workspace dark and empty, except for the soft glow coming from the executive floor. Through the glass walls, I saw Jennifer and Dylan sitting close together on a modern sofa, laptops open but forgotten as they laughed over something on Dylan's phone. The way she touched his arm, the way she leaned in, it was all too familiar, yet completely foreign to the Jennifer I knew. I didn't make my presence known that night. Instead, I went home and lay awake, staring at the ceiling until Jennifer returned past midnight, smelling of expensive wine and wearing a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. The next day, I tried to talk to her about what I'd seen. "You're being paranoid," she said dismissively. "Dylan and I are reimagining the entire marketing strategy. Of course we need to spend time together. This is how successful companies are built." But it wasn't just about work anymore. Jennifer started attending private meditation sessions with Dylan, claiming he was helping her align her chakras, or something equally ridiculous. She began quoting him constantly. "Dylan says," became the preface to every opinion she expressed. Our friends back in Kansas noticed the changes too, even through our occasional video calls. "She seems different," my best friend Matt said during one of our private chats. "Like she's playing a character in some Silicon Valley drama." The final straw came during a rare weekend when Jennifer was actually home. I found a receipt for a romantic restaurant in her jacket pocket. A dinner for two on a night she'd told me she was at a Women in Tech networking event. When I confronted her about it, she didn't even seem fazed. "Mike, you need to understand that in the startup world, relationships are more fluid," she said, sounding like she was reading from one of those Silicon Valley self-help books. "Dylan is helping me explore new perspectives on life and relationships. Maybe you should try being more open-minded." That night, as I watched Jennifer texting away with that familiar smile on her face, I realized we were approaching a point of no return. The progressive culture she'd embraced wasn't just changing her career or her lifestyle, it was reshaping her entire value system. And somewhere in that transformation, our marriage had become collateral damage. Little did I know, the worst was yet to come. The evidence I would soon discover would shatter any remaining illusions about our marriage and the true nature of Jennifer's professional relationship with Dylan Matthews. They say the truth always comes out, and in my case, it unraveled during TechVision's annual summer gala. The event was held at an exclusive rooftop venue overlooking the Bay Bridge, with San Francisco's elite tech crowd in attendance. Jennifer had been particularly excited about this evening, spending hours getting ready in a new designer dress that probably cost more than my first car. That I noticed something was off the moment we arrived. Dylan immediately gravitated toward Jennifer, whisking her away to introduce her to some investors. What struck me wasn't just their closeness. It was the subtle touches, the inside jokes, the way their bodies seemed to naturally align when they stood together. I watched from across the room as my wife laughed at something Dylan whispered in her ear, her hand lingering on his arm just a moment too long. But the real revelation came when Jennifer left her phone unattended during a trip to the restroom. A notification popped up on her screen, a message from Dylan that read, "Last night was incredible. Can't wait for our strategy meeting tomorrow." My hands trembled as I picked up the phone, and for the first time in our marriage, I did something I never thought I would. I looked through her messages. What I found destroyed me. Hundreds of messages between them, dating back months. Photos, late-night conversations, plans for secret meetings disguised as work events. They had even created a private Slack channel for just the two of them, hidden under the guise of a special projects workspace. "We need to be careful," one message from Jennifer read. "Mike's getting suspicious." He's too traditional to understand what we have, Dylan had replied. This is about evolution, about breaking free from outdated paradigms. My hands were shaking. When Jennifer returned, I managed to maintain my composure through the rest of the event, watching as my wife and her lover played their parts in this Silicon Valley farce. Every laugh, every touch, every shared glance now carried a different meaning. I felt like I was starring in some twisted tech world tragedy. The next day, I decided to dig deeper. I took a day off work and started piecing together the timeline of their affair. The late-night strategy sessions coincided with times Jennifer came home with her hair slightly disheveled and her lipstick touched up. The Women in Tech events were actually dinners with Dylan at exclusive restaurants. Even the weekend retreats were carefully orchestrated opportunities for them to be together. I found receipts for hotel rooms booked under the company account, supposedly for visiting clients. Credit card statements showed intimate dinners for two at restaurants I'd never heard of. There were even flight bookings for an upcoming business trip to Napa Valley, a romantic getaway disguised as a corporate retreat. The most painful discovery was a draft email in Jennifer's personal account, never sent, addressed to Dylan. You've opened my eyes to what life could be. The limitations of traditional marriage, the possibilities of true connection. I've never felt more alive. Mike represents everything I'm trying to leave behind. The Midwest mentality, the conventional thinking, the resistance to change. Each new piece of evidence felt like a knife twisting in my chest. The Jennifer I knew, the woman who once cried during our wedding vows, who used to leave sweet notes in my lunchbox, who planned our future together, had been replaced by someone I barely recognized. Someone who could justify betrayal as personal growth and label loyalty as outdated thinking. That evening, I sat in our living room, surrounded by the evidence of their affair, waiting for Jennifer to return from another late meeting. The modern apartment that had never felt like home now felt like a stage set for the final act of our marriage. The city lights twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and I could hear the distant sound of traffic below, the constant buzz of a city that had taken my wife away from me. When Jennifer finally came home, her cheeks flushed and her eyes bright with that now familiar glow, I knew it was time for the confrontation that would change everything. The truth was about to explode, and there would be no going back to the life we once had in Kansas. The progressive culture she'd embraced so eagerly was about to show its true colors, and I was finally ready to face it head-on. The confrontation began the moment Jennifer walked through our apartment door that evening. She was still riding the high of whatever meeting she'd just attended with Dylan, her emerald eyes sparkling with that new vitality I'd grown to hate. The evidence was spread across our modern glass coffee table, hotel receipts, screenshots, photos, all telling the story of her betrayal. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice catching slightly as she recognized some of the items. I remained seated, trying to control the trembling in my hands. "Why don't you tell me, Jennifer? Or should we call Dylan to help explain?" My voice was steadier than I expected. The color drained from her face, but it was quickly replaced by something else, defiance. "So you've been spying on me?" she accused, immediately going on the offensive. "Going through my private messages? This is exactly the kind of toxic, controlling behavior that Dylan says is outdated." I interrupted. "Save the Silicon Valley philosophy for your TED Talk. I want the truth. How long has this been going on?" What followed was perhaps the most surreal conversation of my life. Instead of denial or remorse, Jennifer launched into what seemed like a rehearsed speech about modern relationships and breaking free from societal constraints. She paced our apartment, gesturing animatedly as if giving one of her marketing presentations. "You don't understand, Mike. Dylan and I share a connection that transcends traditional boundaries. He sees the world the way it could be, not the way it was. This isn't just about physical attraction. It's about intellectual and spiritual evolution." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Evolution? Is that what we're calling adultery in Silicon Valley these days? "This is exactly why I needed more," she exploded. "You're still stuck in your Midwest mentality, seeing everything in black and white. Dylan understands that life exists in shades of gray. He's helped me break free from the limitations I didn't even know were holding me back." The conversation deteriorated from there. Jennifer revealed that she and Dylan had been discussing ethical non-monogamy and how they believed traditional marriage was an outdated construct. She spoke about their plans to revolutionize not just the tech industry, but relationships themselves. "We could all be part of this," she said, with an almost evangelical fervor. "Dylan has connections with relationship coaches who specialize in open marriages. We could work through this together, evolve beyond these primitive jealousies." I sat there, stunned by how completely this woman had transformed from my loving wife into someone I barely recognized. The Jennifer I married would never have suggested something so absurd. But then again, the Jennifer I married had died somewhere, between Kansas and California. "Did you ever love me?" I asked quietly, cutting through her monologue about relationship paradigms. She paused, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the old Jennifer. "Of course I did, Mike. But love isn't static. It evolves. What Dylan and I have—" "Stop," I interrupted. "Just stop. I don't want to hear his name again." The truth continued to spill out over the next hour. Their affair had started almost immediately after she joined Tech Vision. The late meetings, the weekend retreats, the business trips, all carefully orchestrated opportunities for them to be together. They'd even been planning to go public with their relationship once they'd figured out how to consciously uncouple from our marriage. "I never meant to hurt you," she said finally, though the words rang hollow. "I just outgrew what we had." "No," I corrected her, standing up. "You didn't outgrow anything. You just traded your integrity for a Silicon Valley fantasy. And you can have it." I walked to our bedroom and started packing a bag. Jennifer followed, still trying to convince me that I was the one being closed-minded, that I was refusing to embrace the future. But all I could think about was how the woman I loved had been systematically replaced by this startup culture pod person who spoke in TED Talk soundbites and justified betrayal as personal growth. As I headed for the door, she made one final attempt. "Mike, please, try to understand. This is the future. Traditional marriages like ours are becoming obsolete." I turned to look at her one last time, this beautiful stranger wearing my wife's face. "No, Jennifer, the only thing that's become obsolete is my trust in you." The weeks following our confrontation passed in a blur of legal meetings and painful decisions. I moved into a small apartment in the Mission District, far from the sleek high-rises of Soma, where Jennifer and Dylan's world existed. The divorce proceedings began, and surprisingly, Jennifer didn't fight. Perhaps she was too busy disrupting traditional relationships with her startup savior to care about the details of ending our marriage. The tech community in San Francisco is surprisingly small, and news travels fast. Within days, I started hearing whispers about Jennifer and Dylan's revolutionary approach to modern relationships. They had somehow spun their affair into a story about breaking free from societal constraints, and the Silicon Valley echo chamber ate it up. There were even rumors about them planning to launch a startup focused on relationship innovation. I couldn't help but laugh when I saw Jennifer featured in a tech blog, discussing how traditional marriages were ripe for disruption. She was wearing one of her new designer outfits, sitting next to Dylan in their ultra-modern office, talking about how they were pioneering a new paradigm of human connection. The Jennifer I knew in Kansas would have rolled her eyes at such pretentious nonsense. The hardest part wasn't the divorce itself. It was watching how easily our 5 years of marriage were dismissed as some kind of outdated experiment. Jennifer's social media became a showcase of her new life. Meditation retreats with Dylan, speaking engagements about revolutionary relationships, and endless posts about personal growth and breaking free from conventional limitations. But something unexpected happened during this period. As I shared my story with colleagues and friends in the tech industry, I discovered I wasn't alone. Others had experienced similar transformations in their partners, watched as the startup culture's obsession with disruption had torn apart their relationships. We formed an informal support group, refugees from the cult of Silicon Valley. Enlightenment. One evening, about 3 months after moving out, I received a text from Jennifer. She wanted to meet for coffee to achieve closure through conscious dialogue. I agreed, more out of curiosity than anything else. We met at a pretentious cafe in Hayes Valley, the kind that served $8 toast and called it artisanal. She looked different, even more polished, if that was possible. But there was something else too, a brittleness behind her carefully curated exterior. As she talked about her new life with Dylan, their plans to revolutionize relationship dynamics, I realized I felt nothing but pity. She had traded authenticity for artifice, real connection for buzzwords. Are you happy? I asked, interrupting her monologue about their upcoming TED Talk. The question seemed to catch her off guard. For a moment, the mask slipped, and I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by her now standard Silicon Valley smile. I'm evolved, she replied, as if that answered everything. That meeting provided the closure I needed, but not in the way Jennifer intended. I saw clearly that the woman I loved hadn't just changed. She had disappeared entirely, replaced by a carefully constructed persona that fit the Silicon Valley narrative. The next week, I submitted my resignation at my startup job. The culture that had destroyed my marriage had also killed my enthusiasm for the tech world. I accepted a position with a company back in Kansas City, not in Overland Park, but close enough to home, while still being something new. As I packed up my San Francisco apartment, I found our old wedding album. The Jennifer in those photos, genuine, warm, real, seemed like a character from another story entirely. I left the album on her doorstep with a note. I hope someday you remember who you were before Silicon Valley told you who to be. The day I flew back to the Midwest, San Francisco was shrouded in its typical fog. It seemed fitting, this city of smoke and mirrors, where reality bends and transforms until you can't recognize what's real anymore. But as the plane broke through the cloud cover into clear blue sky, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope, sometimes. Moving forward means going back, not to repeat the past, but to remember who you really are. Silicon Valley had taken my wife, but it hadn't taken me. In losing everything, I'd somehow found myself again. They say every ending is a new beginning. Mine started at 35,000 feet, heading east, leaving behind the fog of Silicon Valley for the clear skies of the Midwest. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I was finally seeing things clearly.